Welcome back to another edition of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. Sorry for the delay with this podcast, but I've spent the last 3 weeks on the road going to WonderCon, TCM Film Festival, and Star Wars Celebration. I'm not complaining, but I just didn't have as much time or internet connectivity as I'd hoped for. But finally, I can now share with you the latest podcast, and it's going to take you on a journey across the galaxy.
Saturn has 9 moons, the greatest of which is Titan. Titan is only slightly smaller than Mars. Titan is the only moon in the solar system that has an atmosphere.
40 years ago, Stuart Gordon adapted Kurt Vonnegut's novel, The Sirens of Titan, to the stage. Now, Sacred Fools Theater Company in Los Angeles is reviving that adaptation and finding it surprisingly topical.
Everyone now knows how to find the meaning of life within himself. But mankind wasn't always so lucky. Less than a century ago, men and women did not have easy access to the puzzle boxes within them. They could not name even one of the 53 portals to the soul. Gimcrack religions were big business.
Cinema Junkie Podcast is thrilled to take you on another theater field trip to look at how Sacred Fools unearthed Gordon's 1977 play and mounted this new production. Gordon is probably best known for directing such cult horror films as From Beyond and the classic Reanimator.
Herbert West brought a lot of dead people back to life, and not one of them showed any appreciation. H.P. Lovecraft's classic tale of horror, Reanimator.
Mr. West.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head get a job in a sideshow?
It will scare you to pieces.
But initially he worked in theater before turning to a career in film. A few years back, he created a brilliant musical adaptation of Reanimator called Reanimator the Musical.
Of course he's dead. The dosage was too large.
You killed him!
No. I gave him life.
Reanimator! Reanimator! Reanimator!
I became an avid fan of that show and followed it all the way to Scotland for the Fringe Festival. You can check out my podcast about that fabulous show in Cinema Junkie episode number 41. But back in 1977, he adapted and then directed a stage version of Vonnegut's The Sirens of Titan for Chicago's Organic Theater. He even worked with Vonnegut on that adaptation, and the novelist insisted that he not be overly faithful to the original source material. In fact, Gordon recalled that Vonnegut suggested he treat the material as if the author had been dead for 10 years. For Sacred Fools, Ben Rock directs the new production. Rock and Gordon previously collaborated on the Ovation-nominated cannibalistic love story Taste for Sacred Fools. I included my interview about Taste in the Cinema Junkie Podcast 113 on gourmet cannibals. So in case you can't tell, I love Stuart Gordon's work. So make an effort to check out this new show that runs through the first week of May. Sacred Fools describes the play as a visually dazzling and darkly humorous science fiction epic about what happens when Malachi Constant, the richest man in the world, loses everything and sets out on an unbelievable journey through space and time and discovers nothing less than the meaning of life. The play also features Malachi's wife Beatrice and Winston Niles Rumford, a former millionaire who now with his dog has become a collection of particles ever since he drove his spaceship into a time tunnel or a chronosynclastic in Fundabulum. I I think that's how you say it. Now he materializes at regular intervals, and he has a plan to have his wife and Malachi marry to create a son who will play a role in the universe. And oh, did I mention there's also a Martian invasion of Earth?
Earth's casualties were 461 killed, 223 wounded, none captured, and 216 missing. Mars casualties were 149,315 killed, 446 wounded, 11 captured, and 46,634 missing. At the end of the war, every Martian had been killed, wounded, captured, or been found missing. As much butchering was done by amateurs as by professionals. Mr. and Mrs. Lyman R. Peterson of Boca Raton, Florida, remember.
Sacred Fool's production of The Sirens of Titan is wildly imaginative. Take actor Jesse Merlin. He had to use a crazy puppetry rig to play the decapitated Dr. Hill in Reanimator the Musical. And he has to do some major contortions in The Sirens of Titan to play his new character. And the play does boast some very clever staging that takes full advantage of the intimate theater space to bring you into the world Gordon and Vonnegut have created. After seeing Sirens of Titan on opening night, I went backstage to the dressing room to speak with Stuart Gordon, Ben Rock, and Alicia Conway Rock, who was one of the rotating artistic directors at Sacred Fools when Sirens was selected. So here's a discussion of bringing Vonnegut's Sirens of Titans to life for a new millennium. Stuart, so this is a revival of an adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut that you did 40 years ago. So what's it like returning to something like that?
I had forgotten half of it. It's great. It's it's an old friend that's come back. It seems as fresh as ever. That's the thing that's the most amazing to me. Something that's 40 years old is usually like an antique, but this Vonnegut is. He's so far ahead of him, of the rest of us, that, he's never going to get old.
For this production, did you make any changes to the adaptation that you had done? Did anything change for this one?
I did a little bit. Ben and Elisa had some really good suggestions. Mainly it had to do with fleshing out the character of Beatrice a little bit more, giving her a little bit more to do. And I think those are, they're good ideas. I'm very happy with the changes.
And Ben, what made you want to bring this back, to take something that was 40 years old and put it on right now?
Well, The Sirens of Titan has always been one of my favorite books. I read it when I was about 18 years old. And it was around that time, it was maybe a year or two after that I found out that The Organic had done an adaptation of it. And it was something that was on my radar all these years, but when I found out about it, I was in Orlando, Florida, and I there was no internet. I didn't know how to find it. But then over about three and a half years ago, I worked with Stuart on a play that he directed called Taste, and I asked him about it then. I really wanted to see it. To me, it is kind of a timeless story that really hit. Like when I saw it. Stuart always talks about kind of the World War II overtones and stuff like that. I was reading it in the early 90s, and I didn't that stuff wasn't what hit me about it, but like learning about that kind of deepened it for me. But I thought that it had really universal. The themes of it were very universal, and as oversharing, as kind of an avowed atheist, there's still a need to feel like you're a part of something bigger, and so to have a play that both refutes and underscores religion somehow in a weird way, it kind of speaks to our need for a higher purpose, even if there really isn't one, and that's one of the major themes that runs through the whole thing. So just finding the script was kind of a detective story, just getting it from the archive and then seeing it and being like, oh my God, there's something nobody's done. I've never seen a piece like this in theater.
You mean you didn't keep a copy of it?
I couldn't find it. It was really true, and I said I think there's one in the Chicago Public Library in their archives, and sent Ben off looking for it, and he had to jump through a lot of hoops. Both of you guys did. Alicia had to deal with the Vonnegut estate, who had completely forgotten that this ever was done, and then there's always someone who wants to do a movie of this or television series or something. So it was like trying to get them to agree to let this old script come back to life.
When you originally adapted it, what was it about the book that appealed to you? Because Vonnegut does seem to be very difficult to adapt.
Well, Vonnegut, got to work with Vonnegut, got to meet him, and that was the thing. When he first showed up, we were being very, very, careful to do everything exactly as it was in the book. And he said, I wrote a book. You're making a play. You got to be ruthless. You got to just cut this, get rid of this, move that, combine these characters. You don't need all of this stuff. Blah 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 blah. And it was like. He was absolutely, he said, you've got to pretend that I've been dead for 10 years, was the line he said. And, I've never heard a writer ever say anything like that before. Most of them are so worried if you change a comma, and David Mamet would kill himself or kill you, if you changed any of his words. But Vonnegut was just the opposite, and it was such a pleasure to work with him. And, now he has been gone for 10 years. I don't have to pretend anymore. And I really miss him. And it was great to be working on this because I kept sort of feeling like he was there, sort of whispering in my ear, and in Ben's. He's, the work is brilliant, and he's still with us.
You both mentioned how fresh Vonnegut's work still feels. Is there something in particular right now in the current political climate we have
What could you be angling for?
that makes it especially appropriate for why you picked it?
When I proposed the show, we were not in our current political situation, so that wasn't necessarily what was driving me. But I have to say that once our current political situation arrived, as it did, all of us working on it were constantly finding parallels to that kind of stuff. And, we talked about trumping up Rumford, for instance, or even Malachi. Malachi at the beginning of the play is, this guy who was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple, and that sounds a little familiar. But, ultimately I tried personally to let the story be the guide and to try to stick to what Vonnegut did. And if people want to, if it finds resonance in that way, then that's awesome. But it's not. I would rather do that than try and nail it and kind of make it so specific to our time that 5 years from now, when people look at pictures of it, they're like, I feel like I hope this is a play that could be produced 40 years from now again, frankly.
And for you, was there anything particular you saw in this version that...
as Ben said, when we did the original production of it, we really made it about World War II, which is what Vonnegut was thinking about when he wrote the book. He said nobody got it. He said he was amazed that we actually, realized that Rumford is Roosevelt. And, the idea that anyone thinks that World War II, was a crazy, unjust war, that attitude is disappeared. But, Vonnegut, he wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, which essentially is the same book, but making it really clear as to what he's talking about, that he is talking about the war. Because no one, when he did Sirens was only the second book that he ever wrote, and people just didn't get what exactly he was going for. Now it seems to be so much about what's going on, and people, it was funny, even before Trump was, president, people kept talking about how Trump seemed like a Vonnegut character.
True.
I think that in these days of Trump that we're going to be seeing a lot more Vonnegut, something tells me.
Old comfort.
Well, you got to get the comfort where you can, these days.
The production was very clever in terms of a lot of you guys. It was a very busy production in terms of things are moving in and out, and there's all sorts of activity going on. How much of that was kind of written into your actual play, and how much did you guys bring to this particular production? What's the mix of that?
Well, we pretty much did Stuart's script. As Stuart said, he did a couple of revisions for us and kind of looked at stuff, basically putting some more stuff back from the book into it, but it was really all very much in Stuart's style. And we just wanted to kind of keep a moving stage picture. And our set designer, Christina Lobata, figured out a way, I think, to turn the plains of Mars into a spaceship, and there were just and we wanted it to surround the audience too. But that was really just me looking at Stuart's script and realizing there's 2 scenes where there's like a clergy talking to a congregation, and there's 2 scenes of a teacher, and there's 1 scene of a demonstration, and like there's all these things that can surround the audience. And to me, it's not confrontational, but it's in your face. Like he and I feel like that's Vonnegut. What I love about Vonnegut, and I think what makes him hard to adapt, is that so much of it is about his authorial voice. But I think in Stuart's adaptation, he kind of managed to contain that voice and put it in there and create it in such a way that it does feel like it's sort of being told to the audience in so many places. I don't know if that's part of what I love about the way he adapted it and the way that he kind of found, and I think that's what kind of makes it universal.
I think it's like, in a way, it's like Shakespeare. Shakespeare, one of the things, he was writing movies before there were movies, essentially. He's having big battle scenes. He's having, we're jumping from France to England. We're all, it's not like it's, now most theater is like it takes place in a kitchen, and
taste.
yeah, exactly. And this is, we're going to other planets. We're going through half the solar system in this show.
Yeah, but we also have because we're doing this in a very 1950s, 1960s sci-fi style. Like we were able to have like the saucer crashing and stuff like that, which we're able to pull off with lights and stunts, lights and choreography. And it feels a little Star Trek-y, but the style we were going for was very Earth versus flying saucers, Day the Earth Stood Still in terms of the design aesthetic. And I think that kind of action lends itself to that. So it's not a get out of jail free card, and it takes a lot of work to kind of stage it. But it also enabled us to kind of just keep the story chugging along, because it's a busy story. When you sit back and think about all the things that happen in the story, there's a lot going on.
And you're putting the actors to work. That's what I like too. I mean, the whole sequence where the saucer is crashing and they're sliding on they're hanging on for dear life. You really get a sense of the danger, which is, it's all the actors who are creating that.
Yeah.
That was brilliant.
Yeah, I love that.
You are a filmmaker as well as somebody who's worked in theater. Did it ever occur to you to also try to do this as a film?
Well, I have to tell you that I was once summoned to San Francisco to meet with a guy who had bought the film rights, and it was Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. And he was planning on making a movie, and he wanted to get Bill Murray to play Malachi Constant, the richest man in the world, which would have been fantastic. And he showed me a lot of the production designs that they had been doing, and it was great. He had the rights for, I think, a dozen years or more, but unfortunately never got made. Now there's been talk of TV miniseries or this or that, and it is a very, it's a big production, to do this thing. If you did it as a movie, this would be a $100 million movie, easily.
What is it about theater that you enjoy that's different from film? What can you do on the stage that's different from film?
Well, what I like about the theater is that it puts the audience to work. The audience is, the imagination of the audience is what you're really engaging. And what they're going to do is what they create, we all create together as a group, the actors and the audience, is something far better than any individual or a movie could do. Movies, I think, are very, for the most part, very passive. You sit in a chair and watch it. And theater, you're with these people, you're in it. And, I like a lot of Ben's staging where he's surrounding the audience, with the action.
And you guys worked together on Taste, which was also, and both of these venues are small, very intimate. And when you talk about being in your face, you're like 10 feet away from the actors. Talk a little bit about kind of the different way that you engage people with Taste versus this one, because Taste was very intimate and small with just, I think it was only 2 actors, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, and you could smell the cooking as well.
Well, that's the thing, again, with theater, is that you can, smelling, using the other senses, engaging those other senses, is really, I love that about theater, that you're able to do that. You're all in the same space, breathing the same air. And it's sometimes the audiences forget that the actors are really right there in front of them, and I always like to remind them. I love it when the audience, the actors touch the audience members and they jump out of their seats. They're not expecting that.
Well, Taste was very much in your face in a very surprising way.
Yeah. This has far fewer penises were eaten in the production of this play. Still some, though. Taste was, I was one of the artistic directors at Sacred Fools when my friend Janelle Riley gave me the script for Taste and told me that Stuart was attached to direct it, and it was one of the best scripts I've ever personally read to this day. I could not put it down, and the idea of Stuart directing it, again, knowing of his work and knowing who he was, going back to the organic, but also as a giant raving horror fanboy, knowing his work from Reanimator and stuff like that. The idea of getting to work directly with him and see how he put together a show like that, which was like just a magnificent piece of choreography and suspense and really touching and brilliant. And actually emotional, like a play that when people would describe it, they would always talk about, the cannibalism and stuff, but really it was a relationship piece, and how Stuart worked on that. It was a huge learning experience for me and an inspiration to see somebody with that kind of history as a director, as a theater director who's been doing it longer than I've been alive, and honestly, one of the best experiences of my life in theater, just seeing him work on that. What are the similarities between that and this? They're pretty different.
Well, although I think this is a very emotional show too. I think this show is very, has a tremendous amount of heart, and so did Taste. It was weird. It was, both of those plays did really kind of reach you emotionally.
Oh, that's definitely true. Yeah, and to me, like the places where the book got me emotionally are the same places where I think that this play does. The thing about Taste that I thought was really surprising, though, was like the scene everyone would talk about in which the thing was consumed. When I read that script, I was like, there will be rioting in the streets, and actually, it was the most dependable laugh in the whole play. And by the time that happened, everybody was okay with it. It was really, really interesting how that went down.
The way that we're structured. Our artistic directors are on board for a term, and then we move over, and it's all an elected position. So, as Ben said, he was one of the artistic directors when Taste was selected, and then I was taking a term as one of the artistic directors when this show was selected. So the show was one of the ones that I was particularly excited about.
And what was it about it that appealed to you that made you want Sacred Fools to be producing it?
I've always been a Vonnegut fan since I was a teenager, and Ben had been talking to me about the show and his excitement about reading the script because he knew about it, but nobody had read the script. And when he finally got it, I actually read it before he did, which was kind of funny. It showed up, and through a variety of weird circumstances, he ended up handing me the script, and I read it really fast. And he popped into the room after I'd read it, and I said, "It's good. It's good. Like I don't know how you adapt this. I don't know how you do that." But I read it, and I was like, "This is how." Who knew? So when I read the actual script, I was like, this could be done, and that's exciting. And I didn't actually see how you could adapt Vonnegut, and then to actually see it come forward was like, well, I think we should really talk about doing this.
Now, Sacred Fools and Stuart have partnered before, so what is it about Stuart that you guys like?
Well, what's not to like about Stuart? I think that Sacred Fools is good at, I think every company has kind of a flavor to it, and I think that the flavor of our company tends to be we're really good at kind of zany, quirky, crazy wild ride types of shows, but it also works well if there's a certain amount of like humor and craziness, but then there's also real heart in it, and I think that that's something that balance is something we do really well. And I think there's something about Stuart that apparently he sort of shares that flavor or something, and it just seems to work out. I think that it's a pretty common feeling around the company that Taste is one of many people's favorite shows that we've ever done. So it just seems like a good fit. And I know that when I was sitting on the artistic director team, because there were 3 of us serving at any given time, when I was sitting on the team, I think we all valued our relationship with Stuart, and we all felt like it was just a really good fit. And Vonnegut also, generally speaking, his voice is a really good fit. So the idea that there was a really reasonable adaptation of a Vonnegut show that also would take advantage of our relationship with Stuart, which we thought was really great, just seemed like, obviously, we're going to do this, right?
And for a theater company, what are the challenges nowadays of trying to get people into a theater, there's so much competition for people's attention and so many different ways to get entertainment and download it in your home. How difficult is it to get people in, and what kind of things are you looking for to try and pull them in?
Well, I mean, I think that we're always looking for, a quote unquote star, something that people would have known of, and I sort of feel like in this instance we kind of have two, with Kurt Vonnegut and Stuart Gordon, and related in different ways. Like Stuart has a giant fan base, and also his Reanimator musical was a humongous hit. But I also think that people who really know where he came from, they know that he came up with David Mamet. You directed the first David Mamet adaptation ever, right? Or first David Mamet script ever, right?
Well, we did the first professional production of Mamet's work, and helped Mamet shape sexual perversity into the play that it is now. I like Sacred Fools because it reminds me of my days at Organic. It really does. I also like the things that they do. They have this whole thing that they do on weekends, the serial killers shows, where anybody in the company comes up with an idea for something, and they can do it on a Saturday night, like it start at 11 o'clock or something. And if the audience likes it, they vote to keep it going, and they do the next part of it the next week. And I love stuff like that. It's like, Peter Brook, was one of my heroes. He says all you need is an empty stage and an actor, and you've got theater. You don't need much. And I think that's what makes it so much fun.
People are probably familiar with your filmmaking career. Can you give me just a little bit of background on how you got into theater and what it was?
Well, I was a theater student at the University of Wisconsin because I couldn't get into the movie class. And I thought, well, it would be nice to learn something about acting. And I got so hooked on theater that I ended up doing it for the next 15 years and realizing that, I had thought that theater was sort of bad movies. And then I realized that theater has the ability to do so much more than a movie does.
Tell me a little bit about the theater company that you started.
Well, it was started by my wife, Carolyn, and myself, the Organic Theater Company. And we set it up. This was not a waiver type situation. We paid our actors right from the beginning, even though we weren't paying them much, but it was enough for them to be able to devote their energy entirely to theater. They didn't have to, drive cabs or wait tables or any of that stuff. And we would try to keep an ensemble together, and we focused on doing original work. That was really the way it started.
And Sacred Fools kind of reminds you of that?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about what you kind of think defines the company. How would you define kind of the kind of work that you're looking for and the kind of theater that you're looking to produce?
Well, I think that when Sacred Fools is firing on all cylinders, we do pretty carnivalesque work. That would be the word I would use. But that doesn't mean, like, something like Taste is actually a very realistic play, for instance. But then, we would do shows like Neverwhere. We actually have done this is one in several literary adaptations that we've done of genre stuff. We did Neverwhere, which is Neil Gaiman. We did Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is Philip K. Dick. We did a play called Bill and Joan that was about William S. Burroughs. We do a lot of stuff that kind of has, I don't know, I'll say a literary bent, and
Gory stories too.
Gory stories, Edward Gorey. And I think that's the kind of work that we tend to specialize in, but we're not limited to that. Like we don't just do dark stuff or just do light stuff. We kind of we try and hit different audiences. The show that we did previous to this was sort of a fairy tale for grown-ups, and then before that was a black box show that Alicia directed, actually, that was kind of about a very dysfunctional family. We tend to play around in a lot of those ways, but I do kind of look at like what I was aiming for with this in terms of the kinds of productions we do are like the Neil Gaiman adaptation or the Philip K. Dick adaptation that we did. And, to answer your question from earlier, though, like that sort of is how you will find an audience, because, like if I found out, and it's not an if, a few months ago there was a play called Vonnegut USA, and I absolutely had to go see it. It was as a huge Vonnegut fan, I will seek that stuff out. And so when you find something like that has that much of a hook to it, it really is kind of catnip. And we do look for stuff like that because you're right, it's hard to get people to come to the theater. And there's, I've been told there's more theaters in LA than New York City, but that's not more good theaters in LA than New York City. And so it's hard to find the good stuff, and you want to be the good stuff, but it's also just hard. It's harder to do it. It's harder to get people out. There are fewer full-time theater critics these days, so you have to do something that kind of rises above all of that noise, to get people out.
I was also going to say that when you go to the theater in New York, it costs a fortune. You have to really have a lot of money to go to the theater, whereas coming to Sacred Fools, it's like about the same amount of money that you'd spend going to a movie, really. Which is I love that, and I love the fact that the audience is young, and energetic and want new things. They want to see something they have never seen before.
We'll say, to that end, I think that we, as a company, our culture has tended to be willing to go a little bit edgy, and I think that the reason that we're attracted to kind of risky or difficult or like this show is not easy to stage. And I think it's a big risk, honestly, to say we're going to try to put Vonnegut on the stage. We're going to try to, show this giant epic space adventure somehow magically on stage. I think that's a calculated risk that we're taking, hoping that it will appeal to people and hopefully younger people who want to come out and see us do something that's a little bit dangerous, hopefully.
Yeah, dangerous for us and terrifying because there's 1,000 ways to do it wrong. It's easy to screw this stuff up. There's so many moving parts in a show like this. We have 4 different video projectors and a giant dog suit and an alien from Tralfamadore that it's like everything has to be working exactly right or it looks hokey. And I don't want to be embarrassed in front of a Vonnegut fan, and I want to live up to whatever Stuart's expectations of the best of what his work could be. I want to give that to him.
You guys mentioned New York theater, and I think when Reanimator the musical came out, at the same time that was debuting, they were trying to mount the Spider-Man production on Broadway. And it seems like some of the stuff that's being done on the big Broadway stages seems to be trying to imitate movies, whereas Reanimator, the musical, and this seem to be embracing specifically what theater can do and to engage the audience and kind of like filling in that gap, rather than trying to be, flashy and have all this, no, we can leave things a little rough around the edges and you guys fill in the details.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to. We don't have the budget of, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, and we're not trying to make a theme park ride here. To me, what Stuart said is absolutely true. You want the audience to kind of use their imagination and have a wild ride that's a lot of fun. That isn't a movie. I want someone to come, I don't want someone to be like, oh man, Captain America sold out. What am I going to do? Oh, maybe I'll go to the theater. That person doesn't exist. It's somebody who wants to come see something like this or who wants a different experience. And, and it does happen where someone's like, I saw this live show or I saw this play, and you just got to see it. It'll blow your mind. It's completely unlike anything you've ever seen. And I mean, that's kind of what you have to do, because we don't have enough money to make this into a theme park ride, and I don't know if we did. I don't know if it would be as engaging myself.
It doesn't matter to a movie if there's an audience or not. An empty seat is going to, but theater is all about that relationship between the audience and the actors, and it's the only art form, I think, where the audience helps create the art. Every night. And that every audience is different, so every show is different. Every performance is different, and that to me that's the kick.
You mentioned there was another Vonnegut show going on. What is it for each of you that you think makes him stay so fresh and that keeps engaging an audience? You want to start?
Gosh, I think it's what an imagination this guy's got. He also, it's a real weird combination of cynicism and heart. There's the beginning of this, he's saying, how the guy says something about somebody up there likes me, and he's sort of ridiculed for it. But the play basically ends with that line, and you feel so differently about it when you get there. And I think that's Vonnegut. I think it's that underneath that crusty, been there, done that. I mean, this is a guy who went through World War II. The stuff that he talks about in Slaughterhouse-Five, where Dresden is bombed and everything is completely destroyed. It's like World War III, and he comes climbing out and there's nothing there and everybody's dead. He lived through these things, but somehow managed to keep his his heart, and that comes through in his stories. His stories are tough, but there's a tremendous humanity to them.
Yeah, I would say, while we were doing this, I've been rereading a lot of Vonnegut, and one of the things I did hit was Slaughterhouse-Five because, as Stuart was telling me, kind of the thematic connections between Slaughterhouse-Five and Sirens of Titan. And when I read Slaughterhouse-Five, I was 18 years old, and I thought it was punk rock, and I thought it was anarchic, and I thought it was funny. And I reread it about 2-3 months ago, and I found it to be heartbreaking and emotional. And I started piecing together that Vonnegut's stuff, a lot of it comes from his own PTSD or whatever it was. Even Breakfast of Champions, which I think is his funniest book maybe, or the one that is intended to be the funniest, is about a Pontiac dealer going insane and about a terrible violent thing. And Vonnegut talks about his own personal suicidal thoughts in that book and puts himself into the book. I think that there's something so present about his stuff. It's not like it's a product of the 50s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. It's like you're in this guy's head and experiencing life through his eyes in a way that I don't know of any other author who ever did what Vonnegut did in that way that I've ever personally read. And it is weird too, because reading it as a teenager and then reading it as a man in my 40s, it really is like two different sets of work. And I think that good work like that, like you keep seeing a different angle on it, and it moves you in different ways than it did before. And this book was no exception. Although this book really did emotionally move me when I first read it, when I reread it, especially after talking to Stuart about his interactions with Kurt Vonnegut and how Vonnegut had kind of given him insight, and he just had insight into the story that I never would have had in the first place. You start realizing it is a commentary on war. It is a commentary on all of these, there's so many themes that are running through it. And the hardest part about like doing it as a piece was trying to choose the ones that you're going to focus on, because you could make this whole thing about determinism if you really wanted to.
I think he had a really refined bullshitometer. And I think that the clarity of that, and combined with the fact that he's brilliant and was able to really wield words in an incredibly poignant way, I think that that mix of things means there are things about the human condition and about what it means to be a person that are universal truths and that will always be true and have always been true. And I think Vonnegut saw right through all the BS and completely saw that stuff, and that is what he wanted to write about, what he wanted to capture. And so I think those things are timeless, and they aren't specific to a time or a specific culture. They're specific to being human. So I think we all connect to it, even if we can't. I'm not a guy who went to Dresden and got captured and had this World War II experience at all. And yet I find myself relating so strongly to his perspective and his voice, and I think it's because he had an incredible, uncanny ability to capture what it is to be a person.
Do you have any specific memories of working with Vonnegut, about working on the script, or anything in particular that you learned from him?
Well, one of the things, was right after the war in Vietnam had just ended. And, I had been protesting against the war. That was, Vonnegut said to me at one point, he said, you really can't speak out against the war because you didn't go. Which I thought was, it's one of those things you never forget. He said, I can talk about World War II, which everyone thinks is this great, glorious war. But I think it was bullshit. And I can say that because I was there. I was in the war. My friends were dying around me, and you can't say that about Vietnam because you didn't go.
So is that the bullshitometer thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Pleasure.
All right.
As always.
That was Stuart Gordon, Ben Rock, and Alicia Conway Rock talking about the new Sacred Fools production of Kurt Vonnegut's The Sirens of Titan. It's currently running at Sacred Fools Theater Company and runs through the first week of May. Thanks for listening to another edition of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. Coming up next will be a discussion of Casablanca on its 75th anniversary and a discussion of nitrate film projection. Cinema Junkie is also a proud sponsor of Landmark Theater's midnight movies at the Ken Cinema. So make sure your late-night plans for the weekend include a movie at the Ken. Harry Potter and Paprika are coming up next. So, till our next film fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident Cinema Junkie.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.